Thank you so much for coming to my talk today. And thank you for coming to Unreal Fest 2024 here in Prague. My first time. It's an amazing city, just gorgeous. And this is next generation animation tools in Unreal Engine. So because we're talking animation, I'd like to know, do we have any animators here today? Ooh, a lot. Awesome. Okay, so this talk is for you, but if you didn't raise your hand, this talk is also for you. So we're going to dive into the thick of it, and you should come away from this talk hopefully excited about what my team is trying to do and the future of animation. Quick introduction, I'm Chase Cooper, and I'm the product manager for rigging in Unreal Engine. I've worked in both games and film. I spent about a decade and a half building digital characters at studios such as Industrial Light and Magic. I'm a huge gamer, so I was excited to transition into the games industry about 5 years ago, where I started Epic on Fortnite Chapters 1 and 2, building characters in the game. So I've been on the Unreal Engine team for the last 2.5 years now. So to kick things off, let's take a look at some animation being created by our talented customers in Unreal Engine. This is our animation sizzle reel from last year. We're going to give you a good idea of what is possible with the animation tools.
Are you plugged in?
Yeah.
All right, ready?
All right, so at Epic, cool. Yeah, awesome work. I didn't make all that. All of our customers made all that. All of you, all around the world. Really awesome stuff. At Epic, we do use Unreal Engine's animation tools for many of our products, including Fortnite, MetaHuman, and recently, Lego Fortnite. Lego Fortnite marked a huge milestone for these tools that I'm going to show you today. We were able to deliver all the animation for the game with these tools. We had a team of around 15 animators internally at Epic creating gameplay animation and cinematics. And we expect this number to grow past 85 this year to help create upwards of 800 plus emotes and content utilizing all of these tools. So why do I believe these tools are so powerful? Unlike other DCCs, such as Maya, we offer the ability to create characters and animate directly in context. There's no waiting for renders. There's no management of complex, cumbersome pipeline tools required only for sending data back and forth between applications for simple tasks, such as adding bones or controls for animation. We will always offer a flexible workflow. We want you to work how you want. We're developing our tools to be artist-friendly, focusing on human-centered design. With the Skeletal Editor, we're building a framework to innovate on problems such as weight painting. And we understand that productions move at a rapid pace. We know that production demands are higher than ever before, and we want to give you the ability to create faster. And from an artist's perspective, get to the fun stuff. Our brand new modular control rig system is a great example of this philosophy within our tools, being design-first driven product intended to make animation production easier. So let's connect our digital animation tools framework inside Unreal. You can animate using our sequencer tool. Control rig allows you to create robust procedural animation rigs, and the Deformer Graph enables you to add advanced deformations. The Skeletal Editor lets you create bones and skin weighting directly in the editor. And finally, retargeting is faster and simpler than ever before. So Unreal Engine 5.4 is a really exciting release for my team. So far, this is our biggest update yet for animation tools, and we are far from being done. Okay, so one of the themes of this talk is trying to say no to round-tripping everything out of Unreal. We will always offer the flexibility to use whatever software you need to get the job done. But we understand round-tripping the DCC apps can be a painful, soul-sucking process if things go wrong. So by reducing DCC round trips as much as possible, we reduce the chance of data loss in this back-and-forth process with apps such as Maya. Staying in Unreal can directly improve productivity when creating your real-time projects. We are creating tools for the future of digital animation. So let's jump into Unreal. I have really cool things to show you today. First up, we're going to take a look at animation authoring inside of Unreal, and we do that with our sequencer tool. All right, so if you're new to our ecosystem, we have, in Unreal, we have an animation mode, and this is where you animate your rigs and interface with our animation tools and sequencer. So this is Bungee Man. I just added him to my scene by dragging and dropping him onto this box, and that will initiate the rig. And then you start animating immediately. I can grab his controls, and I can start setting keys, and I'm animating him all in context with all my lighting and at real time with no compromises. So Unreal control rigs are fast, incredibly fast, with no need to have to build animation geometry just to animate at 24 or 30 frames per second. You can animate directly in your high-resolution final mesh with final lighting. So Unreal Engine is a game engine, and you animate in the game level directly using the sequencer tool. Within that level, you can create level sequences. These sequences can be thought of kind of like a scene to Maya. They hold all the animation data. And so Sequencer has had many quality of life updates in Unreal Engine 5.4. It's now heavily customizable to fit your personal workflow. I like a really clean and simple interface with less clutter. So I turned off a lot of the icons and stuff I don't need, and I just want to focus on my animation and what I'm doing directly in my scene. So if you're an animator, we want you to feel as familiar as possible in these workflows. So I'm going to add some animation to Bungee Man here. Bungee Man's kind of like our mascot. He's turned into our kind of control rig mascot. It was rigged by Jeremy Passerin, one of our Epic Games artists. So I'm going to pose him up here, and we're going to take a look at kind of an intro to layered control rigs. This came in Unreal Engine 5.4, and this lets me animate on top of any animation or pose using the full rig. This isn't another rig. This is the full rig that you would animate with without animation. So we're going to be taking a look at a lot of that system today. It's a really awesome, powerful feature for animation. So gizmos. You might have noticed in my last demo, the gizmo, if you're familiar with Unreal, looks a little different. That's because we added a new plugin for 5.4, it's experimental plugin, and rewrote our animation gizmos. The gizmo that comes with Unreal and has been in Unreal forever for level construction is not ideal for animation. It doesn't have things like gimbal lock and everything. So I wanted to show how to turn this on, and we'll talk about it. New plugin, new TRS gizmos, you turn that plugin on. Then it gives you a preference, a magic checkbox. We have a lot of those in Unreal. It's kind of hidden, but in the preferences, that's why I'm showing this. You search for enable new, and there's this checkbox, enable new gizmos. You can toggle this if you want to go back and forth between the gizmos, but if you're animating or rigging or building content in Unreal, all of our internal artists can't live without this gizmo anymore. My favorite feature is indirect manipulation. You can hold the middle mouse button down and drag anywhere on screen to rotate or translate without having to be right on the control. It's pretty cool as an animator. All right, so Big Bot. I've added some animation to the scene here. And we're going to add a rig, and we've updated our anim details panel. This might seem like a small thing, but it's a really important part of the animation process. So I'm going to add his rig in here, and we're going to pose him up. So to set keys on rigs, it works just like any other software. You select your control, you scrub to your time, and you can hit S, and it will set a key. And over on the right, you can see that we have our anim details right here. And we spent a lot of time making this really intuitive and working for animation. We've cleaned up the channel controls. I'm just kind of posing him real quick, setting some keys. So we have a real basic animation. It's doing great, but it's for the demo, so we're good. So the coolest feature about this is you can select your channels, and it'll isolate them in your curve editor. So you don't have to go hunt for them over here. So it makes really editing your curves extremely fast. And in case you weren't aware, we have an entire suite of constraint tools inside the animation mode. These were added back in 5.1, I believe. And for 5.4, we've done a whole nother pass on them. We're calling it Constraints 2.0. And we've done a lot of quality of life improvements to them. One of the biggest ones being you can now set your settings before creation and after creation. So what I have here is a layered control rig on the dragon. And I've created a cube. And so this whole rig is running, and now I can change my animation. Just have them look at this cube during the animation, and it'll just adapt. The whole rig will adapt as I move this around. And you can see over on the left here, this is our constraint mode, and every time it's blue, it's turning on. So we have a lot of really cool tools inside the constraint system. It'll auto-compensate for you, so we really try to eliminate popping as much as possible. And you see I'm just trying to activate it. We have constraint bars down here. There's a lot of info online. I'm not going to deep dive into all of the constraint system because it's quite detailed, but I want to give a preview. The other big update we made is the constraints used to be stored in your level. That was a problem because you couldn't take them with you to other levels. So we've removed that. We put the constraint manager in the level sequence. So now you can pass your level sequences around in constraints to different levels. And in case you're not aware, here are some of the features and tools that you can already find in the engine. These are also areas we're actively working on and improving. Go through them real quick. Curve Editor, which I've shown. We have a pose library. We have tween tools. We have snapper tool. We have a motion trails. We have temporary pivots. We have space switching. Space switching is just built into our rigs. We have the whole constraint system, which I just showed you. And we're working on animation layers, calling them sections. We're doing a lot of work planned for that for Unreal 5.5. And in case you have not seen this before, our animation product manager, Frederick Nielsen, set up this page on the Epic developer community, which with a bunch of really cool preferences and settings and hotkeys that he uses as a customized workflow to work really, really fast. So if you're just starting out and you want a place to start, I highly recommend checking this out. Even if you're not starting out, I use this workflow. It's a really awesome tutorial, just kind of like those magic checkboxes you need to set in Unreal. Okay, so let's take a look at our rigging tools inside Unreal Engine. Rigging is an incredibly important part of digital animation. A good rig goes a long way in helping build better animation. So Control Rig is Unreal Engine's node-based rigging framework. It utilizes its own lightweight VM called the Rig VM. And you create runtime and animation rigs that you build by connecting nodes together called rig units. So Control Rig is a really powerful rigging framework. It gives the rigging artist an immense amount of flexibility to build a robust animation rig exactly as they see fit. So conceptually, when we rig a Rubik's Cube, we want to animate it the same way you would interact with it in the real world. This can be a challenge in many systems. So for this rig, we can easily build a graph that reparents the hierarchy on the fly using a tool we call the dynamic hierarchy in Control Rig. We're getting a little technical here, so bear with me. Inside Control Rig, we have a few events. One of them is called the interaction event. And this is really cool because it'll fire when any animation control is moved. So I can use this event as a rigger to cleverly reparent and adjust my entire hierarchy on the fly for this Rubik's Cube. We do not lock the hierarchy in Control Rig like a lot of other software. It is free for you to manipulate however you like. And you can see over here, when I animate this, the hierarchy is popping around and changing. So to set something up like this, the skeleton is pretty basic. You just need a root bone. You always need a root bone in Unreal in every asset ever. That's the skeletal mesh pretty much. And you need a bone representing each cube inside the Rubik's Cube. If you have a bigger cube, you just build the same bone. So I'm going to show how this actually works. So this is the graph, Control Rig graph. Okay, if you don't understand this, but we're going to walk through it. This will be online later if you want to try to recreate it yourself. That's why I put the actual graph up here. So if we look at some of the components of the graph, there's one big part of it I want to note, and this is pink arrow. This is a function, and this does most of the work here. So why I want to point this out is because the interaction event is really powerful, and so I can do a lot of cool stuff in this function. I'm using this function twice, and this is basically how the Rubik's Cube is working. Whenever control is moved, it basically fires a distance and tries to find the closest bone to that control. Basically, I want it to give me back the 9 closest bones so I can reparent them and reorganize my hierarchy. So the interaction event lets me put a lot of logic inside this function and do some crazy stuff. So if that seems complicated to you, don't worry, it kind of is. I'm a visual person by nature, so being able to debug this visually in Control Rig was very critical for me. Control Rig has a myriad of ways to visually debug your graphs and rigs, just like in Blueprints. For this setup, I have lines drawing to the 9 closest bones every time an animation control is moved, and you can see that represented here. So as I mentioned, we want the Rubik's Cube to animate exactly how it would in real life, right? So in Control Rig, we can add any static mesh in Unreal as a control shape to a rig. The LEGO rigging team uses this technique heavily. So I cut up my Rubik's Cube, representing a control for each side, and then I added that as an invisible static mesh shape. This is great for rigs such as the Rubik's Cube or the LEGO minifigure, as it cleans up a lot of clutter for the animator in the viewport. And so here's the final result, the Rubik's Cube animated in Sequencer. All right, so I want to talk about another one of my rigging passions and animation passions, and that's adding dynamics to rigs. Physics can bring realism to digital animation, but can also provide more intuitive ways for animators to interface with a rig. So the Spring Interpolate node in Control Rig lets you add physics to bones. The Dragon from UEFN, which some of you might have seen, used this node to create an intuitive system to animate with for animators. You basically yank this one control around, and the entire rig will follow wherever you place it. If you'd like to learn how to build this yourself, this QR code will take you to a document I wrote quite a while ago that it's not too complicated, actually, but it'll get you the basics of trying to build that chain, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. And also wanted to note, this Dragon is available on our Control Rig Samples asset pack in the marketplace if you want to grab this and dig in for yourself and see how it's done. All right, so springs, the Spring Interpolate node combined with the Control Rig component can enable exciting new ways to create animation, motion, and games. So in this example, I was able to take the Dragon rig I just showed you and create a small test game where the rig is actually tied to keyboard input. So as I press various keys, the controls in the Dragon are moved. There's no actual animation here. It is all being animated procedurally with rigging. So the Control Rig component inside a blueprint allows for these types of interactions. It'll let you query and set data inside a Control Rig graph within blueprints. Okay, so if the previous few minutes of this talk about Control Rig graphs seemed a bit complicated and scary to you, we know that. Rigging is hard, but it doesn't have to be. So Modular Control Rig is a new experimental editor we launched with Unreal Engine 5.4. But happy to say we're moving it to beta for Unreal 5.5. So conceptually, we started with the idea of adding a playfulness to the rigging experience. We wanted a kit bashing workflow, something that all users could attempt to understand when you're not a rigger by trade. We designed the system to encourage the sharing of rigging ideas, giving the ability to easily distribute modules with characters. So we have 2 user personas for the system, and this is how we went about the design. We have the rig authors, who will use the Control Rig graph, all the stuff I just showed you, to build the granular aspects of the modules. And then the rig users construct animation rigs for their characters. Authors can guide users by designing their modules intuitively using sockets in the schematic overlay, which is, here's one of the first tests we did for that. I've included some early prototypes. These were built by Helga Matti and Sarah Swartzman, our engineers on this product. And Stefania Medrick, our UX designer, was incredibly critical in helping us build a workflow that works for all users. So rigging has been historically associated with needing to understand complex mathematics to be successful, thus locking the task off to those who don't have time to dive deep into it. While I personally enjoy this, I'm in the minority. You shouldn't have to understand how a quaternion works just to animate a character. Modular Control Rig takes a stab trying to solve this by adding a playfulness to the rigging experience. So let's take a look at the editor. This is our Modular Control Rig editor, and I'm going to pop in Rampage here. He's one of our Paragon assets. And as soon as I load him, I get my root module for free, and I get a socket in the middle. That little dot is a socket. And they tell you what to drag on there. That's the spine. You might notice that the spine is embedded into him because he's pretty beefy. So I'm going to grab the root module and scale up on my control size. And so now any module I add below the root is going to inherit that scale. And I have a bunch of other cool options on my modules that I can tweak to manipulate controls and set options. So I'm going to keep dragging and dropping intuitively, like the shoulder is going to go to the shoulder sockets, kind of where they are positionally. Drag the neck on. And you might notice and while this rig is building, I don't even have the rig hierarchy up because all these modules, we want users to be confident that when you build a rig like this, it takes care of the control hierarchy for you as much as possible. You shouldn't have to manage that after building a rig. Fingers are usually pretty tedious. You can just select your 3 sockets and drag and drop your finger module, and it's going to add your fingers in there. That's all you have to do. Again, they're kind of buried in the geometry, so I'm going to grab them here. And all the modules have a lot of options over here in the details panel that you can tweak. They're all different per module, right? Like some modules might have dynamics, or they might have IKFK switching type stuff. So I'm just going to scale the fingers up so a little easier to grab. And I'm not using any graphs to do any of this work. How this is working is there's a bunch of control rigs running under the hood. Each module is a control rig. It's really easy just to jump in and adjust your modules on the fly or write a new one. Okay, so I changed my arms. My arms in IK mode, made the cubes a little bigger so they're easier to grab. So now we're going to jiggle the rig around, and it's going to work. There we go. And so you're not limited in what you can put in the rig. This rig, the modules we ship have IKFK switching, IKFK matching, spine rigs, look at constraints. All the stuff you would want to find in rigs can be added into this system. There's no really limit to what you can take it to. And so you might notice the pull vectors on the legs are quite far off. What I'm doing is grabbing the module options again. There's a float variable that I can tweak to move these to a better position. And I wanted to note this because the rig authors that are in control rig can expose any data they want to the top level of the module. So you can see I have a ton of stuff here. This is actually a struct that I added to all the modules. They're kind of common settings, and then these are like very specific. And like I said, this data can be anything in control rig can be added to the top for a rig user to manipulate. Okay, so we're done with this rig. It's all working, I'm happy, but maybe I need to build another character, and I don't want to do all of that again. That's a lot of work. So all you do is you switch your skeletal mesh, and the rig will adapt itself. This is the same rig. The module, we have something called the connector event, and you can put any logic you want into this connector event to try to figure out how to build the rig for you. So the modules will adapt to whatever the incoming data is. Yes, there is kind of a failure rate to a point with this, right? There's only so much you can do here. But there really isn't. I mean, sky's the limit. You can put as much logic as you want to try to figure out how these skeletons are working. So I'm going to save this rig out as another rig. And so now I have 2 rigs just with a couple clicks. The same rig on 2 different assets really fast. And I could further tweak this one if I wanted to. And for fun, I took the Rubik's Cube rig and I made it a module. And so I just drag and drop it now. Instead of having to go through, the graph and everything, now I have this cube. And so this is fun, right? Maybe not super useful, but let's say you have a scene or a project with different size Rubik's cubes, 100 by 100 cubes or whatever, or it's procedurally generating. You could essentially write a module that will rig all of those for you without having to create one for each individual asset. And I spent some time, really wanted to test the system out, so grabbed a bunch of different assets and just went at it, and this is what we were able to build. It's quite flexible. The system's really flexible. You can build any kind of asset inside Modular Rig. It's not just limited to bipeds. You can build a tank, like the tank asset in the middle. It's a 4-legged mech walking thing, and the scorpion's really cool. A lot of these have like dynamics, like the dinosaur. Okay, so continuing on with making our tools a lot easier to use. Retargeting has had a major update in Unreal Engine 5.4. This is one of my favorite updates we've added. So the entire retarget process can now be executed through a basic, much simpler interface. So I have a cool little scene here with Rampage in it, and I want to move them around. I want them to have some motion. So now to retarget, you right-click on any animation sequence, and you can do retarget animation. And you get a fun little window, very basic, and you just type in a target mesh. And you're going to get a preview of what is going to be retargeted. So I'm going to just kind of click through here, see what might work best for my scene. This one looks good. And I'm going to export new animations out. And that is all you have to do. You're now retargeted. I'm going to hop in here and check this out and make sure it looks good. All right, looks pretty good. So we'll come back to Sequencer. And I'm going to plop this animation in. And with a couple clicks, I have animation for my scene. And that's how easy retargeting is now. If you need to go further, you can also write out the IK rig assets and continue on down that path. It'll build a pre-built one for you, so it's a lot easier starting point, too, instead of starting from scratch. All right, back to layered control rigs. New feature of Unreal 5.4, and it enables new ways to animate, unlike you ever have before. So I built an example here. I took Bungee Man's walk cycle, and I applied it to Big Bot and Rampage. Quite a different scale coming from Bungee Man to these two guys. But it works, it's retargeted, but you might notice there's a few problems happening on these assets. So we're gonna fix those up using layered control rigs. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take those modular rigs we just built, and I'm gonna add them to these assets in this level. And as I add them, it goes back to T-pose. What we're gonna do is convert them to layered. So now the rigs are relative to the animation. It's sitting on top of the animation. So I make it, we get our animation back. You notice that Rampage's head is a little better, and we turn my rigs on, you can see the rig is now moving with the animation. And these are the same modular rigs I built. There's no compromise. It's not a special other rig or anything. So now I can come in, I can just start animating and fix up the retarget right in my scene and context. So I'm gonna pull his feet up out of the ground and just key it. I'll spend a little bit of time here on keying it up. And so you can spend as long as you want here. And you just animate it just like you would any other character. So there we go, it's already better, just with a couple clicks. And we're gonna do the same thing, just keep going around the character and kind of adjusting it. You notice the IK is working. You know, you can put all sorts of stuff in a rig, you know, to help fix this too. You know, you might have a better rig that would work better for fixing up IK retargeting or motion capture. Pretty cool. So I'm also going to do the same thing for Rampage. His feet are gigantic. I'm going to talk a bit about how this is working. So we have something in the control rig graph called the backward solve, or inverse solving a rig. It is a concept that's been around for a little while. And a lot of people get confused by this, but really all it is it's your bones driving your controls. So you would think, like, why do we not get a cycle here? We're fixing the cycle. There is no cycle happening. We're accommodating that cycle. That's how I like to think of it. So in the control rig graphs, you can basically say, hey, my control is being driven by these bones, and then we fire that event, and then it fires the rig again on top of it. So that's essentially how it's working. So authoring these backward solves it's actually not too complicated. You just need to drive it. You can use constraints, and if you want to dig into that, all the modules have one. So if you want to see how that's all set up, how these are set up, that I'm showing here, you can just open them up and take a look. All right, so we have there's our final retargeting done. Okay, deformers, big part of the animation workflow, right? And in Unreal, we can create fast real-time deformers on skeletal meshes using the Deformer Graph. Okay, so I've built a little tire here, and I've animated this by hand. So this tire rig has a few neat little features in it. One, it rolls along the ground. I have a little like set-driven key setup. If anyone's familiar with set-driven key from Maya, that auto rolls the tire. But I've also piped in a deformer from the Deformer Graph. And not only that, it scans the geometry, all the static mesh and geometry in the scene, and will deform it based on what is happening underneath the ground. So you can see the squash there. I drive a Jeep. Sometimes you have to air the tires down a lot to like roll over things. And so this is kind of what I was simulating here. And with controller, you have the power to expose any type of anything you want to Deformer Graph. So I expose an animation attribute, lets me squash and stretch it even more. So here's the control rig. And another one of my favorite features of the control rig is the sphere trace node, and that's what I'm using here. And so basically, as this tire rolls along, it's scanning the ground geometry, and that plane is just a representation of the transform that it's finding. So this lets me basically visualize and feed this back to the Deformer Graph. And as I wiggle this, you can see the tire rotating. So let's take a look at the Deformer Graph. So the Deformer Graph, how I like to think about it is it's moving left to right. The furthest left is your like rest points, no deformations are happening, and over here is your final deformed mesh. And the important part here is animation attributes. That's how we send data back and forth between these two systems. So animation attributes, as I said, lets you send data from control rig to Deformer Graph. You build an animation attribute inside of control rig, and you tell it what kind of data to send over there. The data will then live on the skeletal mesh that is shared between the control rig and the Deformer Graph. And you get to tell it what bone to put it on. I usually just use the root bone, but there might be reasons to use other bones, of course. So here's an image of the graph, and I'm going to show kind of like what's happening. This is a deformer, similar to Maya or other systems. And so we have Unreal Engine 5.4, we've added a suite of deformers functions that are, this one's the squash and stretch. We have some other ones called like bend, and we also have dual quaternion skinning, which I'm going to show in a second. But this is the key part for this setup, is this animation attribute. You can pipe any data you want from control rig over. In this case, I was able to take the sphere trace result and pipe it into my deformer. So you can do some really interesting stuff mixing control rigs and deformers together. Another really important part of deformers is painting maps. In a lot of instances on your creature, character, or whatever, you don't want to deform the whole character. You know, you might just want to deform the arm or a part of it, or squash and stretch a certain part of it. So vertex attributes can be painted in the Skeletal Mesh Editor and then used inside the Deformer Graph to mask deformers. So I've taken Rampage here and I've made just a little quick calisthenic animation. So we're going to add a common problem in character animation is something called is twisting of your forms. I call it candy wrapping, right? So linear blend skinning will start failing at a certain point. So one solution to help fix that is dual quaternion skinning. So I'm going to build a blended dual quaternion skinning with regular skinning setup here and use a map to control where I want my dual quaternion skinning to operate on, which is mainly the forearms and the shoulders. So the common places that this can be used to fix it up. So I have my skeletal mesh vertex attribute coming to the skeletal editor. I like to use lighting only mode in here. Skeletal editor lets you edit and paint skin weights and also lets you paint deformer maps. All you need to know about this window, we're still working on this, but you just need to give it a name, add weight map layer, and there we go. Now we have some data that I can grab in the deformer graph. So I'm going to paint up my areas. I'm going to speed this up. I won't make you watch me paint for a long time, but paint it up here, kind of gross it out, and then smooth it out a bit. And this is where I want my dual quaternion skinning to happen, so I don't get collapsing of twists, and I get a bit more volume maintenance happening in these areas. Okay, so we're done. Save out that map. Head back over to Deformer Graph, and now we just give it the name, whatever we named it. So I'm going to pipe that in here, compile, and we should have this working now. So now we can add this into our level. So to do that, I want to be able to test it first. So I wrote up some animation. I'm going to load the animation into Deformer Graph. You might notice something kind of weird with the arm, right? This is a GPU deformer. This is a lot different than a lot of deformers in other systems. So you can see the normals are not working right on the arm. I made a mistake in here, and I wanted to leave it in because this is important just to note kind of how it's working. I have to hook up the tangents, right? So now I hook those up. Everything's looking better. Kind of a cool effect, but not what I want. So now I have this whole deformer, GPU deformer set up. We can kind of see the results by toggling it on and off. So we can see the dual quaternion activating in the area that I painted. All right, so now we're going to bring it back into our scene. I'm pretty comfortable with it in here. So to get it into here, there is a, the theme of this talk is another hidden checkbox you have to go find. So you're going to select your actor, and you're going to type in deformer, and it's way down in there, and just click the checkbox and pipe in any deformer you want. And so now we have that turning on. We can turn it on and off and see it live updates. You can see the shoulders looking much better. I definitely need to do a lot more work here, but already I have a setup that I can now go tweak and iterate on, and it's going to help me a lot. All right, so building skeletons. The Skeletal Editor enables you to create bones and edit skin weights directly in Unreal. The Skeletal Editor is now in beta as of 5.4, and we're continuing to push on it to make it better. So I took the dragon and added this really nice shot of animation here using some pre-built animations from Frederick Nielsen. Thanks, Frederick. If you're an artist, you likely know that sometimes the last 10% or so of the creative process is usually the hardest and can sometimes take the most time. Usually it's small details that trip you up, but they can make a big difference in the end. In this case, if you watch his hair on the back, I'll point it out, so I have a laser, it's pretty static. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, so I want to fix it. And this is a good example of a small thing that can add a bit of that last 10% into your animation. So the Skeletal Editor reduces the need for round trips. While yes, it's capable of building your entire skeleton, it's incredibly capable of taking care of problems like this, helping to fix that last 10%, giving life to the characters. So I'm in the Skeletal Editor here, gone into my bone creation mode, and I'm just going to build some bones representing my hair. I'm in orthographic view. We do have orthographic views, believe it or not, in Unreal. A lot of people actually don't know about that. They work generally pretty well for rigging. So what I've done is I've renamed them. You can use a hashtag to rename and pad your numbers out. It's a pretty cool feature. So now I'm going to come in and we're going to start painting some weights. All right, so we have a lot of really cool painting tools in the Skeletal Editor. We have a volume mode, a surface mode, we have smoothing, we have relaxing. All the tools you would expect to find are in here. And for 5.4, the big theme for us were components. We put a lot of time into editing components, such as vertices, edges, faces, and being able to operate on that level. We've added a component editor, and we've added ways to snap bones to all those. And one of the most asked for features was growing points, which I'm going to show in a minute. But I'm just going through here and I'm relaxing all the weights. We have a really cool relaxing algorithm. It's not just smoothing it. It's pretty smart. Yeah, so the other theme we had was we need to be able to animate and pose our bones while painting weights. So we've added that in. You can actually add gameplay animations directly into your Skeletal Editor and kind of paint in real time on what is happening in your game. It's pretty neat. So we have some problems here. So as I said, one of the most requested features I got from 5.3 was this tool right here, growing points. It's almost a necessity, so we've added that. And we have a new component editor, so I'm just going to weight all of these components to that bone. And we're going to grow a bit more, and we're going to relax. We spent a lot of time on the component editor trying to make it intuitive and not super complicated. We didn't want a spreadsheet that made no sense. We really wanted something that was usable. All right, so I'm just going to keep going through, fix all these up. So really quickly, I can grow my points, relax. And there we go. So I've sped this up, obviously. I'm not going to make you watch me paint weights for 5 minutes. And when we're done, we hit accept, and now it looks like we're good to go. Okay, so let's get our updated skeleton into our sequencer scene that we started out with. So I've duplicated the skeletal mesh so I can do some transfer tricks. Because we've added new bones, our animation sequences won't work anymore. But never fear, it's an easy fix, actually. Here's our old animation sequence. A neat trick you can do is to duplicate the animation sequence, which I've done here. And instead of retargeting this new skeleton, we're going to simply swap out our animation sequence skeleton. And because I only added leaf bones, or bones that aren't going to affect the main animation, this trick is possible. So now we have a new animation sequence with our new bones added in pretty quickly. Okay, so let's go ahead and swap out our assets. Because I duplicated the skeletal mesh, I need to swap that out in here. So we're going to point this to version 3. All right, you'll notice our animation shuts off. And this is a good demo of kind of how sequencer works too. And I'm going to point, this animation is invalid now, but I'm just going to update my track to the new animation we just made. So version 3, it's compatible. All right, and so now we have this new asset in here. We should have new bones for the hair. You can check, you can actually turn bones on in the viewport, type in bones, and you're going to get a nicely rendered view of the bones. Okay, we're good to go. So we have bones. And this looks pretty good. But they're not moving yet, right? So we need to add some animation to them. I have a couple options. I could hand animate them. We're not going to do that. We're going to do something cooler. I'm going to add a control rig, and we're going to add some physics to the hair. All right, so if you don't know anything about control rig, if all this seems really complicated, I promise this is like the easiest control rig you can possibly do. It's one node. We have something called the standard function library in control rig. It's a bunch of functions that all of us at Epic have written, and it does some really cool stuff. Jeremy Passerin helped with this one. And so this adds the Springs Dynamics node I showed you earlier, and all you have to do is add this local chain dynamics. We're going to grab each one of our hair bones, and you can drag your bones into the graph to create a list, or an array, as we call it in Unreal. It'd be a list in Python, if you're familiar with Python. So there's our array plugging into our function, and that's it. We just need to do this 6 times for each of the bones. So I'm going to speed this up here. We're just going to copy and paste all of this. You don't even have to understand the settings on it. So we're going to plug in our bones. Each bone we come and drag and drop it, plug it in. All right, hook up the execute context so everything fires. All right, give it a second. All right, so control rigs don't have to be used for animation. They can be used for things like this, writing on top of animation. So now we play, if you watch the hair, you're going to see we get some nice kind of secondary motion happening for free. I don't have to go hand animate it. And to my shot here, it adds a bit more life to it. So now we can see the before and after. So on the left is the before and the new dynamics on the right side. I'll let this play a few times. So you can kind of see it jiggling around in there, but really quickly I was able to just add that extra bit of life to my character. So common question I get, what are we doing now? What's coming? We'll talk a bit about that. Animation deformers will let animators add deformers directly to their animations in Sequencer, opening up new ways to add life to characters. And this is what happens when you give those kind of tools to an animator like Frederick. We built some deformers. We built a sculpt deformer and a push-pull deformer, and he was able to bring those in all in Sequencer and animate and add some really nice like squash and stretch to Manny. Variants, more of a technical feature. For the riggers out there, we're going to add the ability to sidecar your modules and functions inside a control rig and modular control rig. So this enables effective upgrade paths for rigs built with our tools. Also a problem for animators. You have to be able to upgrade your rigs as you're working on them and working on your scenes. You get a new rig, how do you swap it out? And so this is the other part of that story. We're looking at a lot of ways to help that. The Skeletal Editor, we're continuing heavy development of that. We've added the ability to isolate meshes visually while you paint, and we're adding a robust weight transferring tool. We're also making many improvements to the viewport and overall UX of the editor for a much snappier experience. And here's a list of all the things we've already planned and done some of them. Last but not least, control rig physics. Adding physics to rigs and animation brings uncompromised realism. So we're adding intuitive tools to procedurally create physics within our animation authoring suite, such as Control Rig. You'll be able to pose with physics and build robust physics systems, driving rigs similar to the Dragon. All right, so I will be at the booth. Here's the times I'm at the booth. You want to come by and talk any of these tools? I love talking this stuff. Please come by and catch me the rest of today and tomorrow. And some more animation talks, kind of related and kind of unrelated to what I'm talking about here today, but we have a lot of cool animation stuff happening here in Prague, so go check these out if you are not aware of them. All right, so thank you for coming today. If you'd like to talk more or ask questions, please come find me. I'll be right outside the room after this talk concludes. And again, I'll be at the Unreal Engine booth following this presentation and some tonight and tomorrow. Please enjoy this compilation of one of our Unreal Animation Fellowships from this last year. There's some really awesome work in here using our tools. So I'll let this play as we wrap up. Thank you.